Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Zinat Rahman. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Politics. We are so pleased to welcome all of you this afternoon as we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month with Araceli Gomez Aldana of WBEZ Chicago, moderating a conversation with U.S. Congressman Chuy Garcia. Thank you both for being here. One of our students, Jackie Palmyra, will formally introduce our guests in a few minutes. I wanted to tell you about a couple of upcoming events. On Monday, October 18th, so this Monday, join us for an all-star panel discussion on entitled Faith and Democracy, the Role of Religion in American Politics. We are co-sponsoring that with the University of Chicago Divinity School's Martin Marty Center for the Public Understanding of Religion. And the panel includes Rachel Mikva, a professor of Jewish Studies at the Chicago Theological Seminary, Russell Moore, who's a Pritzker Fellow this quarter at the Institute of Politics. He's also a public theologian at Christianity Today, and Asma Uddin, a religious freedom expert who recently wrote a book called The Politics of Vulnerability. Moderating this discussion will be Brie Lascota, who is the executive director of the Martin Marty Center for Public Understanding of Religion at the Div School. On Tuesday, October 19th, David Axelrod, the IOP's founding director, will be in conversation with U.S. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who is the chairman of the House Democratic Caucus and, of course, a rising African-American leader in Congress. After the moderated discussion, we'll open up the floor up for questions. The mic will be in the middle of the room, so please line up to ask your questions. Keep your mask on while you're doing that. And as usual, we'll give priority to the questions asked by students first. And then just general housekeeping, make sure your phones are on silent. We also have lunch available for you that we ask you take with you to eat after today's program. And now we'll hear formal introductions of our panelists from Jackie Rosa. I totally got your name. Jackie is from Palmyra, Wisconsin, and a fourth-year student in the college. She's the co-chair of the IOP Student Advisory Board. Please welcome me in welcoming Jackie to the podium.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Institute of Politics as we welcome Representative Jesús G. Chuy Garcia to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. My name is Jackie Rosa, and I'm a fourth year in the college studying political science and history. I am from Palmyra, Wisconsin, and as a Mexican-American woman from a family of migrant farm workers, I am incredibly honored to introduce Representative Garcia. In 1965, Representative Garcia and his family left their home of Los Pinos, Durango, Mexico, to join his father in the United States, who was working in the fields during the bracero program. These early beginnings paved the way for a successful and impactful career as an organizer and as a legislator, in which Representative Garcia has worked to improve the lives of his working-class neighbors. Representative Garcia started his political career in 1986 when he was first elected to the Chicago City Council. In 1992, he became the first Mexican-American member of the Illinois Senate, which he was a member of until 1999. During his time in the Illinois Senate, he passed legislation to protect immigrants against abusive fees from notary publics, and he worked to make interpreters available to hospital patients with limited English language abilities. In 2010, Garcia won the election to the 7th District of the Cook County Board of Commissioners, which he served on until 2018. Today, Representative Garcia represents the 4th Congressional District of Illinois. Within the House of Representatives, Garcia is a member of the Financial Services Committee, Natural Resources Committee, and the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. The last committee I mentioned has put Representative Garcia in the thick of negotiations on Capitol Hill regarding the infrastructure legislation working its way through Congress right now. Moderating today's discussion is Araceli Gomez Aldana, who is currently a news producer and reporter at WBEZ in Chicago. Araceli, who is originally from Guadalajara, Mexico, has had an established career in journalism, previously working for Side Effects Public Media, where she covered health and its impacts on place, policy, and economics in the Midwest. Araceli also served as a reporter and local All Things Considered host at WBOI in Fort Wayne, and was a producer and host of WFHB Ola Bloomington and co-anchor of WFHB's Daily Local News. Let's give a warm welcome to Representative Garcia and Araceli, who will be having a timely discussion about policy issues facing lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. That was great. I'm going to take my mask off. I am vaccinated. That's okay. All right, we will get started. Of course, we're here in honor of National Hispanic Heritage Month. So I was wondering if you had been celebrating. What have you been up to? Have you celebrated in honor of National Hispanic Heritage Month?
I celebrate frequently, just about every weekend, as a matter of fact. But no, Hispanic Heritage Month is a unique time, I think, to uplift people of Latino, Latina, Latinx heritage across the country and all of our contributions. And it's an important time where we get to point out that we have been a part of this country's history from its inception, preceding its inception, as a matter of fact. And those are fun and interesting points to make. And of course, as we celebrate more contemporary history and the issues of the day, persons like myself are, always trying to make the point of what could make a difference in the landmark legislation being considered in Washington. And of course, that is immigration reform, a pathway to citizenship. And then, of course, the harder questions of how do you make that happen given the two strikes that we've had as we've approached the parliamentarian. But it's a fun month. It's a challenging month because it causes you to reflect. And then, of course, we were visited right as we near the end of Hispanic Heritage Month by the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, last couple of days. And I was very fortunate that she visited the Pilsen and Little Village communities, both in the 4th Congressional District. So every time something historic like that happens, I always remember my parents. My father for being courageous, for his solitude, being away from us for 10 years, at least in my life. I was 10 years old when we migrated to Chicago. And all that time, those years that he spent by himself and only visiting us maybe a week or two out of the entire year. So I think a lot about my mother. I think about her because she was both mom and pa, as we were growing up. And they remain the most important heroes in my life.
Oh, that's great. You were busy. So you were busy these last few weeks.
Yeah, it's been quite busy. And we're headed back to D.C. On Tuesday. So we just, of course, raised the debt ceiling to get us out of that jam. But we've got more jams coming up toward the end of the year. And of course, some huge legislation to settle, to pass, and to get signed into law, and that's no small feat.
I know, and we will definitely get into all of those juicy details. Before all of that, I was wondering, as a family that came to the United States, and your father was part of the bracero movement, thinking about immigration reform. And I think the last time that happened, before most of anybody in this room was born, I want to say 35 years ago, what are we waiting for?
We're waiting for Congress to act. It's frustrating and disappointing that this isn't a bipartisan moment. Even though there have been bipartisan actors favoring and advancing the concept of immigration reform in Congress, in both houses. You've had some Republican champions in the Senate for at least 20 years, and they've vanished. They've gone away. In the House, you've had members who favor immigration reform. Some of them helped us pass 2 bills. The Dream and Promise Act got 11 Republican votes, and then the Farm Worker Modernization Act got 21 votes, so even more so because it had the support of business, agribusiness as well, and they met the fate of other significant legislation in the graveyard known as the U.S. Senate. So that's very frustrating and unfortunate. I think the underlying force that has caused this polarization where immigration becomes politicized and plays into the polarized situation in the U.S. Government is Donald Trump and the rhetoric and the postures of Donald Trump and Republican leaders and members not willing to stand up to that out of fear because of his popularity within the Republican ranks in the Republican Party. So that's very frustrating because there ought to be easily 10 votes in the U.S. Senate to pass those two bills and potentially even two other bills, one for essential workers, and we're not doing that.
Yeah.
So it's a lost opportunity. It's a part of the cost of the polarization of national politics.
Yeah, and we'll get to some of those other things that are holding things up. As we heard in the introduction, you were born in Mexico, and your family came to the United States. What prompted that move?
My family, my parents, my father and my mother, we come from a small village. I think at its height, there may have been about 200 inhabitants or residents of that small village known as Los Pinos in the state of Durango, and right next to the Sierra, at the foothill of the Sierra Madre. And I think early on it became evident to my father and my mother that because we didn't have significant parcels of land, that making ends meet for 4 kids, I being the youngest, just wasn't going to work out. Many men in states like Durango and some of the neighboring states, Zacatecas, another big exporter of labor, had come north to work in agriculture as farm workers. And, they made a better living than trying to eke out a living in rocky, hilly land back in Durango. And there were programs like the bracero program, which were promoted in these regions of places like where my father comes from and I come from. And that's how the connection to the bracero program occurred. And that's what made us transnational actors, and now members of the U.S. Congress.
Right.
I owe all of that to their courage and their willingness to try to improve the lot of their family.
And quickly, for the people who don't know the bracero program, can you describe it?
It was a program established toward the end of World War II to fill shortages of labor, especially in key sectors during the war. And given our proximity to Mexico, the fact that we share a border, it was easy to promote the program there. It was beneficial for both countries, for the workers there. And that's how many of us came to be permanent residents and U.S. citizens of this country, and are now part of the fastest growing community and population across the country, as the latest census figures have borne out.
That's right. We've been reporting on that.
Yes.
What was it like growing up with immigrant parents in Chicago at the time?
So it was, big shock coming to Chicago in February of 1965.
It was cold.
It was cold. It was really, really cold. I had a little jacket. I stepped out of the station wagon that we had driven here in, and I remember feeling that Chicago hawk. Those are what winters in Chicago are known as to those from other parts of the country or the world. And when I got out of the station wagon, I felt that was my first impact. So that was the first shock. And then, of course, came the culture shock of not speaking any English. I knew maybe 2 words, yes, no. I didn't know any of the cuss words yet, but I learned those in the first week. In the Pilsen community, that was my port of arrival in Chicago. And it's where most Mexican immigrants were arriving at that time during the 60s through the 70s, and later we spilled over into Little Village as we were moving on up. And as people, my parents, in this instance, purchased their first home in 1969. So it was a good place to get acculturated, to learn the Chicago ways, to become street smart. There were gangs already that existed. Things were very different in terms of gang cultures and how all of that has evolved and become more violent and mobile, and now in social media and that. But you acquired street smart. You learned how to speak Spanglish as well. Your parents didn't like that. They would call you out on it. But it was a fascinating time to grow up in. For me, it was fascinating because I quickly learned about the civil rights struggle. I learned about racism and anti-blackness specifically. I was introduced to it very quickly. The stereotypes of black people were quickly shared with me, taught to me to be afraid of black people, that they were lazy, that they weren't productive, that they were destructive. I remember that early on because it occurred very quickly after arriving here. And shortly thereafter, I also learned the truth. I learned about the civil rights struggle, the history of black people. And Dr. King became a big figure. And I was also growing up in Pilsen in my first 3 years of life in the U.S. I also learned about the farm worker movement, the Chicano movement among activists in the community. And I was also exposed to Latin American left politics. The first exposure came while as a young teenager. And of course, all of this was happening during the Vietnam War, the resistance to the war, the movement of the Black Panthers, the emergence of the Brown Berets with the Chicano movement, and the farm workers. So the 1968 Democratic National Convention happened here. I was like 13 years old. I was watching it on TV. I already knew who Dr. King was. I had heard his sermons on black radio. So while I learned the anti-blackness, I was also hearing black music and black news and learning more about the civil rights movement. So I was very fortunate to grow up in a setting like that. And I only lived like 3 blocks away from the old Maxwell Street market. So we used to walk there and back, and it was a real bowl of culture and understanding Chicago's ethnic communities and past and the waves of migration and all of that, with a lot of soul music, a lot of really street savvy people, and people who were bent on being successful, even if they came from the most humble origins. Yeah. So I'm very fortunate to have been exposed to that.
Yeah, I remember the first time I went to Maxwell Street Market or the area, and I said, "Oh wow, they have tianguis in Chicago. This is a Chicago tianguis.
Yes.
That's great."
And then in '69, we moved to the Mexican suburbs, and that was the Little Village neighborhood.
Mexican
That's
suburbs.
what folks called it. My parents bought their first home, and I've lived there since. I met my wife walking. She was walking to the store with her sisters one day, fell in love, and we've had 3 children. We have 7 grandchildren. Wow. And we still live in the neighborhood there. And
Loving the suburbs.
It's our community of choice. So yeah, suburban living has been good to me.
Wow. When you mentioned that you were receiving those anti-Black messaging, was that from your community? Was it older generation?
It was from adults, some who barely understood some English. They had learned it themselves. It was a way of distancing yourself from some things. But it was also from kids who were also getting it from somewhere, their parents, other adults, and other young people as well. So that was my introduction to, Chicago, segregation, and of course the larger picture of segregation in our society and the country.
I think you might have hinted to this, but when did you get involved or interested in politics?
My interest in politics occurred probably when when I had moved to a little village. I had heard about movements, black movement, brown movement, Chicano movement, farm workers, civil rights. So I knew that there were all these things going on in the country. But it wasn't until I was a teenager that I was introduced to some adults who were doing Alinsky-type organizing, Alinsky-oriented organizing. And Alinsky, of course, played a big role here at U of C and some of the activism around here. It's sort of Chicago's best-known community organizing philosophy and approaches and tactics, which are evolving. I met this woman named Lola Navarro, who was involved with the Pilsen Neighbors Community Council. Organization still exists. They sponsor yearly the Fiesta del Sol festival. And she introduced a group of kids from the neighborhood. We were kind of radical. We wanted to do stuff. And she sat us down and she sort of broke down what power is. Power in the neighborhood, power in the community. And she's the one that sort of prepped us for what would become my first organizing effort, my first public effort. And that was to picket a local theater where I had taken my wife on a date to watch a movie, and then rats came out and ran around the floor, and people were getting up on the seats and shrieking, and that was kind of embarrassing. And it was also, it angered me. So I went to the park the next day, was chatting with some friends, and everybody became angry and said, we need to do something about it. So we went, we printed some flyers with the grievances around the theater. By the way, the grievances were when you walked on the carpet, when you walked in, the rug, it was sticky and it would go whoosh, 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 as you'd walk in. The bathrooms were dirty, it needed paint. And then of course the rats, that's what really got the people. So we threw up a small picket line. We were flyering and letting people know what we were doing out there. And then it grew and it grew. And then the manager came out and we gave a list of demands. We demanded he shut the theater down after the movie was over. We sat down, we hashed out a set of grievances and what we wanted. They closed the theater for a week and they fixed it up. It was our first victory.
Wow.
So, that was sort of Alinsky organizing, but among a group of Mexican kids from Little Village.
We can almost pinpoint that as Chicago's rat problem as the reason that you are here today.
Yes, without a doubt.
I'm sure we have a lot of people in the audience today that are interested in politics and potentially interested in going into public service. What are some of the key moments in your political career that you think really made you decide this is the way to go?
There are several. First, that sense of understanding power and feeling a little bit of power. The theater is an example. The following summer, we did an action on the anti-poverty program because we wanted some jobs for kids in the neighborhood. And we took over the office of the local anti-poverty office, the administrator. And we thought they were going to call the police, we were going to get arrested, and they didn't. He came toward the end of the day, because we had taken over his office, and we negotiated a jobs program and programs to help kids with recreation, provide them lunches in a local school playground that summer. So a second taste of power and community development, I came to understand, and the fight for jobs, right, for youth. That was another turning point. Then we made the leap to why are conditions in the community the way they are? Why is it that the alderman doesn't speak Spanish, rumored not to live in the neighborhood, And why doesn't he have any Spanish-speaking personnel? And why will he only provide services to registered voters, U.S. citizens, and not to anyone else who is a taxpayer, regardless of their immigration status? And that put us on the track to challenge the existing power structure through electoral politics, because some of us had been against it. We thought we were, above that. We were kind of revolutionaries. We were radical. We didn't believe in the system. And it was when you broke down power and some of the first opportunities to influence power, to shape your community and your destiny, that we started to get the idea that, well, if we elected somebody good, what could we do differently in the community? One was everybody would get services, right? They're all taxpayers. And that intersected with a movement in the Black community to recruit a candidate who was in Congress at that time, Harold Washington, to run for mayor of the city of Chicago. We knew Harold Washington from his work in Springfield as a state senator and later as a congressman, championing issues important to Latinos: bilingual education, immigration rights, non-U.S. military intervention in Central America, et cetera, et cetera. So when he ran for mayor, one of our leaders, a fellow by the name of Rudy Lozano, who was a labor organizer, became our candidate for alderman, and he tapped me to be his campaign manager. I was, 24 years old, had never run a campaign, had just volunteered in 2 campaigns previous to that, and here I was running his campaign. We lost that election by 17 votes, got stolen from us. We didn't fight it. Harold Washington was the Democratic nominee, later became mayor. So that was sort of the first incursion into electoral politics, and most exciting. I mean, our venture into electoral politics turned out to be historic, and it was exhilarating. We thought we were going to change the world because we had elected Harold Washington.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah, a lot of key moments there.
yeah.
And then you, of course, continue on with your career. We heard a little bit about it in the introduction. You were first elected to Cook County, and then you
City
went
Council.
the city council
In '86, which, by the way, in 1986, there was a special election ordered by federal courts. They found the map discriminatory, the ward map, 50-ward map, especially against African Americans and Latinos. They said, you need to redraw it. You need to have special elections. Harold Washington had been stymied in his first 2 years as mayor by a majority Black of all white men except one Latino. And it was that new map and special election that broke the grip of the majority obstructionist Black that had hindered Harold Washington's reign as mayor and as first progressive mayor of Chicago. My election, the election of former Congressman Luis Gutierrez, provided Harold Washington the 25th vote in the council. That's a tie. Guess who breaks the tie? The mayor. That only happened because of Harold Washington's work in Congress only 3 years earlier, amending the Voting Rights Act, where you only had to prove effect and not intent in gerrymandering or redistricting, illegal redistricting, racially motivated redistricting.
Wow.
So that's how we're weaving into Chicago's political tapestry, you might say.
Yeah.
And very exciting, of course.
Yeah, and looking back to your career up to this point, what are some things that really, really stand out and you think this happened the way it was supposed to happen and here we are?
Without a doubt, Harold Washington's election as mayor, it opened the door of City Hall to an administration that was the most diverse. It empowered the African American community in many ways, but it empowered women who had been excluded in a big way. It empowered Latinos. Latinos were appointed to several city departments like never before, to boards and commissions. It established a new way of distributing city services that were rooted in equity and and then a refocus of city investments from the downtown city center to the neighborhoods as well. So that was very, very exciting. And of course, it created a huge tumult, right, in politics in the city. The city became racially polarized. It acquired the name of Beirut on the lakefront, given the council wars that erupted in Chicago City Council. We ended council wars with our election, but it was a moment of great empowerment, and I think Harold Washington became a national figure because of his ascension to the council and how it had happened, and became an inspiration and a rallying cry. Obviously, a very short-lived moment in Chicago history.
Yeah. And reflecting on what we've just kind of all gone through, you mentioned equity and the coronavirus pandemic really highlighted some of those inequities that exist in our city. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you saw during the pandemic that particularly affected your district, and what is something that you want to do about it?
Yeah. Latinos were hit disproportionately. We had the highest COVID rates. We had the highest mortality rates. And in part, it was due to the fact that so many people are immigrants, so many people are undocumented, and try to fly under the radar and getting tested, being able to quarantine, to isolate, to take some of the other good health measures were very difficult for people, and we paid a price. Also, some members of the community were not eligible for some of the relief programs under the CARES Act, the first major piece of legislation that we took to address the virus and its ravaging communities. So our community paid a huge price for it. There was a huge cost, and that's what I saw in a lot of suffering in our community, and people working in low-wage jobs that they had to continue to report to. So we helped keep the country running, and we're hoping that because we did that in agriculture, picking the crops that give us our sustenance every day, 3 times a day, the delivery of goods and services to people, the caring for the elderly, for children, that was pretty heroic, and we hope that that will bode well as we do the reconciliation bill and immigration reform in the coming days. So.
Okay. Which leads me to the Build Back Better agenda. What are some of the things that you think are those that you would like to make sure that are addressed and we see?
So Build Back Better is the president's agenda, and there are 2 components to it. There's the $1.2 trillion package that's known as the hard infrastructure piece for roads, reauthorization of the transportation bill as well for the next 5 years. So there's the hard stuff, bridges, roads, some money for transit. And then there's the larger piece, which is the human infrastructure that I'm really excited and passionate about. And we have fought to keep it at the level that we agreed upon, and that's $3.5 trillion. Remember, our original demand was $6 trillion, and we compromised to 3.5. When I say we, I'm referring to the Progressive Caucus, the largest caucus now in the U.S. Congress. That includes, people like Bernie Sanders in the Senate and other progressives as well. And the president has stuck with this demand as well. He reiterated that when he came to address the House Democratic Caucus a little bit over 2 weeks ago. So we're fighting to hold the line as much as possible. What's in it? Stuff that would just benefit children, women, families, the elderly, people with disability in terms of home care services, the expansion of Medicare. We're talking about dental services for people who are retired, 65 and over. We're talking about eyeglass coverage, vision coverage, and hearing coverage. I didn't know the extent of how many people in our country don't have those benefits. I have to confess. And I thought I knew, a lot of issues. So that's huge. Early childhood services, also very important. And free college, 2 years of free college in the bill. So to me, that's transformational. The extension of the child tax credit, which we passed in the American Rescue Plan, would be made permanent, and it's lifted so many children out of poverty by itself. I represent a very young district. I think I have more children in my district than any other congressional district in Illinois and in most other districts across the country. So I'm an ardent supporter of it. We will probably have to come down some from that top line number, but it's not about the top line number. It's about what investments we need to make that will really make an impact on people across the country. Many universal programs as well. And we're trying to hold the line on those things because we think that it is transformational, especially coming on what hopefully is the heels of the pandemic as we make more progress in that regard.
Yeah. And of course, there's talk about reducing the amount. Where would that money come from?
The money, the beauty of the $3.5 trillion proposal is that it's paid for. It comes from taxing wealthy individuals. It comes from making corporations pay their fair share of taxes, and from cracking down on people who avoid taxes by investing in that aspect of enforcement at the IRS. So we're not talking about increasing the deficit. This is an initiative that pays for itself, unlike what Republicans under Trump did in 2017, where they gave tax breaks to the rich and increased our national debt by $5 trillion when all is said and done. So that's the beauty of the Build Back Better agenda.
And of course, we've been talking about some of the important points that you would like to see. Are there any that are bottom line, you will not budge?
Look, I became the first member of Congress to publicly state that if immigration reform was not a part of Build Back Better, that I could not support it. And that's not an easy position to take because I cherish the components of the Build Back Better agenda that I made reference to, and it's not all inclusive either. So it's a very difficult position to take in many respects, but I think it's a fair one. There hasn't been immigration reform in 35 years since the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, when Ronald Reagan, before you all were born, most of you at any rate, and it's time. Look, polling across the country over the past 6-7 years shows that the American public supports immigration reform across party lines. Majorities in both parties support it. This is the moment. If we're doing something transformational, and we've already done that in the CARES Act, in the American Recovery Plan, in the infrastructure bill, then it's very unfair to leave out immigrants. I've already pointed out some of the roles that the immigrant community played during the pandemic. And we're not just talking about Mexicans and Central Americans. We're talking about Asians. We're talking about European Americans. We're talking about people who came here from many parts of the globe. This is an opportunity in the wake of the struggle for racial equity and racial justice to embrace everyone in our midst and to say that, to recognize everyone's humanity. And I'm really hoping and praying that we will do that. It's unfortunate that it cannot, and tragic, that it cannot be a bipartisan undertaking at this point in time in our history.
Yeah. And as our audience thinks about their questions, I'll ask some of my last questions. And on the immigration note, have you ever had to encounter someone that might have said to you, well, your family did it the right way. I'm against immigration reform because people are doing it the wrong way. And what is your response?
Yes, I've heard that from fellow immigrants who feel, or believe, or may have heard on talk radio or social media from the conservative end of the spectrum, those arguments. My comeback to them is that our country and its neighbors especially are integrating. We passed the USMCA, United States-Mexico Free Trade Agreement 2 years ago. That is an expression of the integration that is taking place regionally in our hemisphere. Canada, the US, Mexico, and Central America as well. You cannot just say we're doing this for trade and ignore those who make the trade possible. That's workers, that's their families, and the fact that there are family members who live here, family members who live in Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, or Mexico, and ignore that. So while we address trade and investment, and that we've excluded people. Trade is mostly about people and what their work produces, and that's wealth and goods and services, and the improvement of life, including technology, right? So that's my argument to them, that first of all, we've done 2 trade deals, but we haven't done immigration reform, okay? Since 1986. We did NAFTA in 92, and we did the trade deal USMCA 2 years ago or so, but we haven't done any immigration reform. So our system is antiquated. Our system is broken. We need to reset it, and this is a moment to begin that process as we figure out what our immigration policy should be for everyone in the country, and as we relate to the rest of the world. But certainly it's broken, and I think as we look at the asylum crisis on the border, most recently the treatment of Haitians seeking refuge here, as we saw prior to that, the crisis of Central Americans coming here. It's a wake-up call that we need to figure out what our relations with the rest of the world is going to be, and to acknowledge our role in creating the crisis and what's driving people here. Our past history of military intervention, of supporting bad actors, especially in Central America, supporting people who were sponsoring death squads, and behind death squads, the repression of human rights in those countries, feminicide, on, and acknowledge those things as we try to craft policies that make a lot more sense, in this time in the 21st century.
And the world is watching.
Yes,
The
without
world
a
is
doubt.
watching. I really appreciated your time answering those questions, and I would like to invite anybody in the audience if they could line up behind the microphone and ask your question to Congressman Garcia. Do you want to go ahead? You can go first.
Hello, my name is Juan Del Mendoza. I'm a first year here in the University of Chicago, and I'm a graduate. So my question to you, Representative, is like you, I'm an immigrant from Colombia, and I also share a passion for public service, electoral politics. And so my question to you is like, how I, as an immigrant, can I learn to adapt and be part of the electoral process in this country while not straying away from my roots?
Yes, thank you. Juan?
Yes.
Okay. want to make sure I heard you correctly. I think while you're a student, getting involved with your peers in the different groups that exist on campus is a good way to start, and it's practical because it's with people around you. If you live in or near a community, getting involved with community groups that are engaged with the immigrant community or an immigrant cause are also ways to be involved. Getting involved with churches. There are many churches that have sort of a social action or social justice component to them. Those are very good ways to become a part of this movement that seeks to create, to change conditions and achieve justice for immigrants. Or if you want to get involved in politics as well, there are many good people that I think believe in the types of things that I have articulated thus far that would be really good places of learning and good laboratories, and you might even get some class credit for them as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan.
And stay informed. Read the news.
Yes, very important.
Hi, my name is Tara. I'm a first year at the Harris School of Public Policy, doing my master's in public policy. Another challenge that we haven't really touched on today is the attacks on voting rights that are constantly going on given outcomes of the 2020 election. My question is, given that the Hispanic Latino community is probably uniquely and disproportionately impacted by some of those attacks on voting rights, what do you think are the most effective ways that we can engage or mobilize the Latino community looking at the elections coming up in about a year?
Yeah, great question, and thank you for raising the topic. Voting Rights Act, voting rights are under severe attack from different quarters, especially conservatives across the country. The fallacy of voter fraud, they've totally failed to make the case. Even Republican officials, election officials, have refuted those allegations time and time again, whether it's Arizona or Georgia, Wisconsin, other places, etc. Today, I heard that Leader Schumer has invoked cloture for a vote on the voting rights bill that Senator Manchin introduced in the Senate. It's a small part of what I support in terms of restoring voting rights, but it's a good one. And many of my colleagues who have an expertise in Voting Rights Act in the House are supportive of it. The challenge for Senator Manchin now is to get the 10 votes that he thinks he can find. One of our leaders in the House, Jim Clyburn, is very skeptical that Senator Manchin will find those 10 votes, which again raises the question about the role of the filibuster in the Senate and why we either need to abolish it, which I support that proposal, or at least amend it so that we can consider critical pieces of legislation like the Voting Rights Act, related things of that nature, so that we protect democracy. That's really what is at stake here, because if we continue down this road, then we will not have the foundation of democracy in just the next 2 to 3 years, potentially, given all of the terrible legislation that is being enacted by state legislatures everywhere, and the calling to question with unfounded myths and allegations that something is wrong with our electoral system across the country. So it'll be interesting to watch what happens. This could be an instance where the only way forward would be to amend the filibuster for consideration of this, and I pray that if we do that, that we also do it for immigration reform, given the urgency and the number of people that would be affected. Thank you.
Welcome, Representative Garcia. My name is Noelle, and I'm one of the master's students at the Committee on International Relations. My question is related to a lot of the working and living conditions that many Latinos, especially Latino migrants, are facing in this country. We currently have children working in labor fields in North Carolina on tobacco who become ill from exposure to nicotine. as well as migrants who have passed away from lack of water or long hours in the heat. My question is relating to the Build Back Better campaign that President Biden is really pushing forward with the agenda, and wondering if the infrastructure and the human infrastructure aspect of it will address key issues like ensuring that these communities have access to clean and safe water, as well as other sides of their living and working areas as well. Thank you.
Great question on that topic. Agricultural workers, many who are Latino, overwhelmingly in every state across the country, is who gets us our sustenance day in, day out. Workers in North Carolina, of course, in the tobacco industry, work under very bad conditions, child labor, the exposure to chemicals. Children are especially vulnerable. If we pass immigration reform as a part of Build Back Better, that will be a huge step for many of those workers who would be covered under the bill that we passed out of the House that's languished in the Senate. The Farm Worker Modernization Act would help improve the lives of farm workers. Absent that, the only way forward would be ensuring that through reconciliation, and if we didn't have to deal with the filibuster, that we could pass legislation that would provide immigration reform and a path to legalization and citizenship for many of those workers. So I see that as being key. The other bill that's languished in the Senate is the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, which again gets to the ability of workers to organize more easily, more readily, that would provide protections for immigrant workers seeking to organize themselves in those work settings. I think those are some of the key aspects of relief for the agricultural workers that you're referring to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Representative Chuy Garcia. My name is Javier Rodriguez. I am from Houston, Texas. And first of all, I wanted to thank you for being here today. As a first-generation college student myself, I find it very inspiring to have an empowered Latino and fellow paisano Mexicano here, so thank you. And my question to you also relates to voter rights and voter suppression. So as the median age of US-born Latinos is 19, and with your district similar to mine, roughly 2/3 of adults speak Spanish, mainly in the household, making communication even more difficult. So what is your promise to the American people and to fellow Latinos such as myself to encourage voter participation? And what should I do, or members, young activists such as myself, take action to encourage voter participation?
Yeah. Thank you. Henry?
Javier.
Oh, Javier, perdón. I'm the first in my family to get a college degree too, so well done, knock it out. Having said that, Texas is one of those critical states that is experiencing tremendous voter suppression. And the conduct of the Texas legislature is reprehensible, seeking to make it difficult for people to register to vote and then to vote by cutting off access, especially for lower income people, for people who don't speak English, creating all of these barriers to participation. That's why we need to end the filibuster or amend the filibuster to pass voting rights protection to supersede what the Texas legislature and Governor Abbott have done in Texas, what other legislatures are seeking to do in Florida, in Georgia, in other states that are red today. If you leveled the playing field and didn't suppress the ability to vote, I believe that Texas would turn blue, first of all, in a very rapid manner. The reason that it hasn't is because Republicans have invested huge amounts of money in maintaining their voter base, which is overwhelmingly white, motivated, informed, and they turn out to vote. The reason that more young people who are eligible to vote but don't register to vote and feel disconnected from politics is because we don't invest in them. There are other sectors of voters, most of whom are Latino and Mexican American in the case of Texas, who, because of all the hoops that are being placed before them, don't get to vote. So we never get a real expression of real democracy under level playing conditions in Texas. That's why we need voting rights reform, and I'm hoping that that will happen in the next several weeks in the U.S. Senate.
Gracias.
Thank you.
And we have time for one more question.
The United States could stay far ahead of China in economic growth if we welcome large numbers of talented immigrants in, and that would be more feasible with more investment in early child care and free college. So when Republicans say we can't afford it, there's this counter argument that we can't afford not to, just in terms of generating a huge amount of economic growth. But I don't hear arguments like that made. So how can Democrats sell the human infrastructure more effectively and even address some of the bases of support and constituents of Republicans?
That's a great point. I agree with you. Republicans are much more effective in their messaging, in their succinctness, in their delivery, in the investment that they make, and in their uniformity. Now, the uniformity part is harder with Democrats because we're a much more diverse party. The tent is much larger. There's racial diversity, there's gender diversity, there's ethnic diversity, and of course the geographic diversity. And thank God we don't have a figure like Donald Trump as the head of our party. So that's a part of the challenge, and I share those frustrations with you. Democrats, for example, have not historically invested robustly in the Latino vote. They only look at the highest performing voters, and that's who they're communicating with. They're not investing in those voters that are infrequent or those that we have yet to register to vote. And that's the case especially in Texas with young voters between the ages of 18 and say 30 years of age. And that's why we don't have more electoral success in those countries. But you're right, in terms of the future, there is a timidness on the part of Democrats to speak bluntly like that, while Republicans are savaging us with, ushering in and forcing socialism on the people of the country, not being forceful enough against China and being an extension of the Chinese Communist Party, on and on. Ludicrous arguments, but on the economic agenda, their arguments are succinct, they are crisp, and they are consistent as they deliver those messages. We have, because of our diversity, a much harder time delivering those messages, and in part, they beat us to the punch. We must become more efficient in that delivery. We've got to have more concise messaging and find a way to agree on what uniformity we can have in the messaging that we have. We have not got there yet, but we better hurry up because next year's elections in 2022 are going to be critical, and they will determine if we will have a democracy with institutions as we know today.
Congressman Garcia, thank you so much for spending time with us, and it's been a pleasure for me to be here with you today. And happy Hispanic Heritage Month, everyone.